The Mafia boss ignores the black stripper in public, but treats her like a queen in private. Zora Delacroix stood near the entrance of the crowded charity gala in New Orleans' Warehouse District, her borrowed black dress clinging to her honey-brown skin. She froze, heart hammering, as her eyes locked on Dominic Caruso. He was across the room, in a tailored Italian suit, dark eyes fixed elsewhere. A blonde woman clung to his arm, laughing at something he said. One of his men leaned over and whispered, nodding toward her. Dominic's gaze met hers for a fraction of a second. No smile. No recognition. Nothing. Then he turned to his group, speaking softly. They laughed. The blonde woman's eyes swept over Zora with clear disdain. Just the night before, Dominic had brushed her hair, cooked for her, read poetry in Italian. He had held her like she was the most important person in the world. Now he acted as if she didn't exist. Zora's chest tightened. Every nerve in her body told her to leave, yet she couldn't. How had her secret world collided with his so violently? What had led to this moment of humiliation in front of everyone? Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and subscribe. Tomorrow brings another story you won't want to miss. A special shout out to all our viewers, both new and returning, from the United States, Canada, South Africa, the United Kingdom, and every corner of the world. Thank you for being here and supporting these stories. You're the reason we keep creating them. Now, let's begin. Zora Delacroix grew up in New Orleans' 9th Ward, in a narrow shotgun house pushed so close to the street that every passing car felt like it rattled the front steps. The neighborhood was a mix of weathered porches, stubborn oak trees, and people who carried entire lifetimes on their backs long before they turned 30. The house she shared with her mother had peeling paint and windows that stuck every summer, but it held warmth, a kind that came from effort, not comfort. Her mother, Clarice, worked double shifts at a nursing home on Claiborne Avenue. She moved through life with a quiet determination, as if she could keep the entire world from collapsing by simply refusing to stop moving. Every morning she left before sunrise, returning after dark with tired eyes and a smile she forced into place for her daughter. Zora used to sit on the edge of her mother's bed, watching her unlace her shoes and listening to whatever was left of her energy spill out in soft sighs. Her father was a ghost who still had a heartbeat somewhere. He disappeared into the prison system when she was 6, swallowed by a sentence she didn't fully understand until she was older. The only reminders of him were a few photos tucked in a shoebox and the slanted handwriting on birthday cards that arrived late every year. She learned early not to hope for more. School was where Zora found her way. She was the child who filled notebooks with essays, who read every assigned chapter twice, who caught teachers' attention not because she tried to shine but because she couldn't stop absorbing everything around her. She earned a partial scholarship to Tulane University, something almost no one from her block achieved. Clarice cried when the letter arrived. Zora did too, though hers came from fear mixed with joy. The scholarship covered tuition, but not housing, books, meals, or transportation. Every counselor she spoke to told her she'd figure it out, but the gap was large enough to swallow her dreams whole. Grants helped, loans followed, but the numbers never settled. No matter how many forms she filled out, the costs stacked up faster than her solutions. The breaking point came one weekend when she overheard her mother talking on the phone, whispering about overdue bills and a paycheck stretched too far. Clarice never complained to her directly, but Zora saw the truth in the worn soles of her mother's sneakers and the way she hesitated before buying groceries. Zora couldn't let her mother carry both of them forever. Her cousin Danielle was the one who mentioned the Velvet Room. Danielle had worked in clubs for years, floating between bartending and dancing depending on what paid better. She wasn't ashamed of it. She liked fast money and the freedom that came with it. One evening, while they sat on Danielle's porch eating snowballs, she spoke bluntly. "You're beautiful, Zoe. And you've got presence. You walk into a room and people notice. You could make real money. Money that would cover everything at school." Zora didn't respond right away. She knew what Danielle meant. She also knew what people said about women who worked in clubs. Still, the idea planted itself in her mind, persistent and heavy. The Velvet Room sat in the warehouse district, far from her neighborhood and even farther from the life her mother thought she lived. The club wasn't like the dim bars she'd imagined. It had velvet curtains that framed every entrance, crystal chandeliers hanging low enough to cast warm reflections on polished floors, and a stage that looked more like a theater than a dance platform. The air held the scent of expensive liquor, perfume, and money moving quietly from hand to hand. Powerful men visited, politicians, oil executives, lawyers who charged more per hour than her mother made in a week, and men whose names traveled through the city without ever appearing on paperwork. They arrived in tailored suits, loosened ties, and expressions that shifted between entitlement and exhaustion. They came to forget the world outside, to indulge in distractions the rest of the city never saw. When Zora first stepped inside, Danielle walked her through the layout. She explained the rules, the security protocols, the expectations, and the boundaries. The women who worked there weren't stereotypes. Some were single mothers, some were college students like her, some were women who simply preferred money fast rather than stretched out over weekly shifts. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a reason for being there. Zora told her mother she got a job at a hotel in the Garden District, working nights at the front desk. Clarice accepted it easily, proud that her daughter found work that didn't interfere with school. Zora hated lying, but the truth felt too heavy to place on her mother's aching shoulders. The first week at the Velvet Room was overwhelming. The stage lights were bright enough to blur faces, which helped her survive. She learned quickly how to let her mind separate from her body. She could be present without fully feeling the moment, her own quiet version of armor. While her body moved with practiced grace, her thoughts drifted to lectures she needed to review, assignments she needed to finish, or the sound of her mother humming while cooking red beans on Mondays. Customers treated her differently depending on their mood, their power, or the weight of their secrets. Some tipped generously and spoke with respect. Others admired without crossing lines. A few pushed boundaries, and security handled them before she needed to react. She stayed alert, always aware of her surroundings, always calculating how to leave each interaction intact. She didn't enjoy the work, but she didn't hate it either. It was simply what she had chosen to do to stay in school and keep her mother from carrying more weight. She promised herself it was temporary. 1 semester, maybe 2, just enough to stabilize her finances. She had no idea that her whole life would shift the night Dominic Caruso walked into the club. She didn't know yet that he'd sit in the darkest corner with a glass of bourbon, watching everything without reacting, his presence quiet but commanding. She didn't know he'd become the first man who looked at her like she was more than a distraction. But that moment was still ahead. For now, she was just Zora Delacroix, daughter of a tired mother, student clinging to a dream, and a young woman trying to survive one night at a time. Dominic Caruso came from a bloodline people in New Orleans still whispered about. His family reached back to 1920s Sicily, to men who came to America with nothing except old loyalties, sharpened instincts, and a willingness to build power in places where the law blurred. The Carusos started small, corner businesses, shipping contracts, favors exchanged in dim rooms, until those small pieces grew into something larger. By the time Dominic was born, the family name carried weight from the Gulf Coast to the East Coast. Dominic grew up in a world where control mattered more than comfort. His father, Vito Caruso, believed softness in a boy was a weakness that could get him killed. Dominic learned early to observe before speaking, to respond without raising his voice, and to manage anger the way other children managed games, methodically, with precision. While other kids were taught lessons about sharing, Dominic was taught lessons about survival and consequences. He stood 6'3" as an adult, with the solid frame of a boxer who trained more than he talked. His shoulders carried a quiet strength, and his posture suggested a man who didn't need to prove anything. His eyes were the darkest part of him, deep, sharp, and unreadable like black coffee left untouched on a quiet morning. Women often noticed him first for his looks, but what held their attention was his silence. He didn't speak unless he needed to, and that restraint made him more intimidating than any loud threat could. When Dominic was 27, his father suffered a sudden stroke that left him unable to run the empire he'd spent decades shaping. Some men would have stumbled under that kind of responsibility. Dominic stepped into it without hesitation. He took control of every operation, shipping routes, warehouses, financial flows, and tightened the entire network with an efficiency that forced his rivals to either back down or fall in line. Under his lead, the Caruso Reach stretched from the Gulf Coast through Houston, Memphis, and Atlanta. People feared him not because he behaved like a monster, but because he didn't have to. Dominic spoke softly, made decisions with a calm clarity, and carried consequences in his presence alone. He didn't rage, didn't shout, didn't threaten. Men who underestimated him rarely did so twice. His rules about women were equally controlled. He didn't date, didn't commit, didn't entertain attachments. His philosophy was blunt: use them, pay them, forget them. No emotions. No shared histories. No vulnerability. To Dominic, intimacy was a transaction, not a connection. The source of these rules came from family wounds he had watched unfold long before he took power. His uncle Salvio had been destroyed when a woman he trusted spoke to the FBI during a raid. She had given names, details, and locations. Salvio never recovered, not from the prison sentence or the shame. Dominic was only 15, but he remembered the look in his father's eyes when the news broke, the way a single woman's betrayal shattered a man who once felt untouchable. Years later, his cousin Marco suffered a different kind of downfall. Marco's wife testified in a state investigation, exposing operations she claimed were just business secrets she thought wouldn't matter. By the time she realized the damage she'd caused, it was too late. Marco lost his position, his standing, his place in the family. Dominic observed these outcomes quietly, absorbing the lesson: women could destroy a man faster than any rival. So he kept his boundaries firm. He never slept with the same woman twice. He never let anyone into his home. He never allowed tenderness to mix with his private life. His world was a place where weakness didn't survive. That was the world Dominic lived in the night he first walked into the Velvet Room. He went there to finalize a quiet meeting in one of the upstairs lounges, a quick conversation with a businessman who owed him more than money. The club wasn't new to him, but he rarely paid attention to the stage. He came for business, not distraction. But that night, he paused. The room was filled with music and murmured conversations. Liquor glasses clinked. The glow from chandeliers bounced across velvet curtains and polished wood. Women moved with practiced fluidity under the lights, each one performing with confidence and intention. Yet Dominic's attention didn't settle on any of them. It landed on a woman who wasn't trying to captivate anyone at all. Zora stood at the center of the stage, her movements smooth but distant, her expression calm in a way that made her seem both present and unreachable. While other dancers commanded the crowd, Zora appeared to move in her own world. She wasn't performing for the men below. She wasn't adjusting her body for extra tips. There was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, a sense of control that contradicted the room she was in. What caught him wasn't her body, though she was striking. It was her stillness. Her ability to withdraw inward while maintaining the rhythm expected of her. She wasn't blank, she was focused, controlled, and almost serene. It reminded him of someone who had learned to protect the most vulnerable parts of herself by keeping them hidden. Dominic found himself standing longer than intended. His associate noticed. "You good?" the man asked quietly. Dominic gave a short nod and moved toward the lounge, but something about Zora stayed with him longer than he liked. He returned the next night. Not for business. Not for pleasure. For her. For 2 weeks, he came and sat in the same corner, always silent, always watching. He didn't approach her. He didn't order anything beyond a single drink. He just observed. Zora never looked in his direction, never tried to catch his eye, never tried to entice him. The other dancers noticed his presence. They whispered about the quiet man in the corner who looked like he could break the building in half if he wanted to. Some thought he was scouting. Others thought he wanted a new favorite. Zora didn't speculate. She kept her distance, unaware that the man with the unreadable stare had already shifted the direction of her life. Dominic wasn't sure what he was waiting for. All he knew was that every night he returned, he left with a question he couldn't answer. Why her? By the second week, Zora could feel the weight of his gaze before she ever stepped onto the stage. It wasn't loud or intrusive. It was steady, quiet persistence from the same corner booth where he sat night after night. The other dancers whispered about him, but Zora didn't join their conversations. She kept her head down and focused on her routine, though every nerve in her body sensed the presence of the most dangerous man in Louisiana, watching her with a focus she couldn't interpret. Dominic Caruso didn't come with an entourage. He didn't flash money. He didn't flirt or smirk like most men who drank enough to forget their own names. He simply watched, with a stillness that unsettled and intrigued her at the same time. She wasn't used to attention like that. Men stared at her body, not her mind. Men wanted her curves, not her silence. Dominic seemed to study something deeper, something she wasn't sure she wanted exposed. On the 15th night, she made a decision she hadn't planned to make. She finished her last set, walked backstage, changed into her slip dress, and stood in front of the mirror. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a pressure she couldn't name. She had lived her life reacting to necessity. This time she felt drawn forward by curiosity. She stepped onto the main floor, ignoring the calls from a few regulars who wanted a private dance. Her feet carried her toward his booth before she fully accepted what she was doing. Dominic looked up as she approached, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. "You keep coming here," she said quietly. "I figured I should at least ask why." He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then slipped into the booth across from him. The shadows wrapped around them, softened by the low glow of nearby lamps. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You work hard to disappear," he said. "Most people try to be noticed. You don't." "I'm not here to entertain anyone past what's required," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "You're not like the others. That doesn't mean I'm special." He studied her, not in a way that objectified her, but in a way that felt like he was tracing every layer she kept hidden. "Special isn't the word I'd use," he said. "Necessary is closer." She frowned. "Necessary for what?" "For clarity," he said. "I watch people. It's what I do. You're the first person I've seen move like someone who carries a whole life on her back and still refuses to break." Zora swallowed, unsure how to respond. She had been called beautiful, strong, sexy, and every variation of those words. But no one had ever described her with such precision. "Why keep coming?" she asked finally. He leaned back. "Because I'm deciding whether to offer you something only a few people have ever been given." Her heart thudded. "Which is?" "More than money can buy." The words should have sounded like a trap. Instead, they felt like a door she didn't know existed. Later that night, after her shift ended, Dominic's driver waited for her outside. She could have walked away. She could have said no. But something in her chest tugged her forward, guiding her into the black car that carried her toward Audubon Park in the Garden District. His townhouse was nothing like she expected. The entrance opened into a space filled with marble floors polished smooth enough to reflect light. The furniture was modern, clean lines, muted tones, everything placed with intention. Expensive art adorned the walls, the kind that didn't scream wealth but whispered it. Fresh flowers sat in tall vases, filling the air with a soft, natural scent. Silk robes hung on hooks near the hallway, as if waiting for someone who lived there regularly, though the house felt untouched by any woman. Dominic stood in the center of the living room, watching her take in the space. "This isn't to impress you," he said. "This is simply where I live." She nodded, unsure what to say. He stepped closer, his expression steady. "Before anything happens, you need to understand the rules." She held her breath. "Rule 1," he said. "No one can know about us. Not your friends. Not your co-workers. No one. She nodded slowly. Rule 2, you will never be seen with me in public. I don't bring anyone into my world outside these walls. Her chest tightened, but she stayed silent. Rule 3, you never ask me about my business. Not once. Not ever. Zora met his eyes. Why me? Instead of answering, he laid out what he offered in return. I'll make sure you never worry about rent again, he said. I'll cover your tuition, your books, your expenses. You won't set foot in that club unless you choose to. And if anyone ever threatens you, they will no longer be a problem. She exhaled shakily. So you want ownership? No, he said softly. I want clarity. You give me peace I don't understand. I give you a way out of the life that's crushing you. She didn't expect the next words. I want to take care of you, he added. Not because you're weak, but because you deserve more than what you've been handed. Zora felt something shift inside her, something she'd buried under years of exhaustion and survival. Dominic reached out then, brushing his fingers against her wrist. The touch was gentle, almost questioning. When she didn't pull away, he guided her closer. Their first night together wasn't what she imagined from a man with his power. He touched her slowly, as if she were made of something delicate. His hands learned her body with reverence, not hunger. His lips moved with intention, his breath warm against her skin. The world outside his townhouse, bills, late shifts, fears she never voiced, faded until only his quiet care remained. For the first time in years, she felt held instead of used. Midway through, tears slipped down her cheeks. She tried to hide them, turning her face away, but Dominic caught her chin gently and brought her gaze back to his. What's wrong? He asked softly. Nothing, she whispered. It's just, no one's ever been this kind to me. His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something deeper. They were fools, he said, wiping her tears with his thumb. All of them. I'll show you what they should have given you. He kissed her again, slower this time, as if promising something he hadn't said out loud yet. By the time dawn touched the windows, Zora realized she had crossed a line she could never step back from. And Dominic knew it too. The months that followed formed a rhythm neither of them acknowledged out loud, but both moved within as if it had always existed. Zora's life split cleanly in two, the world everyone could see, and the world only one man owned access to. She never said the word kingdom, yet that was what it became. Private, controlled, and bound by rules she didn't always understand but followed because of the way he touched her, the way he looked at her when they were alone. Dominic kept their arrangement fluid yet consistent, rotating between the places he trusted. Sometimes he sent a driver. Sometimes he appeared in person, quiet and unreadable until the car door clicked shut behind her. The New Orleans townhouse remained their primary refuge, scented with expensive candles and faint hints of whatever he had cooked earlier in the day. He never used caterers. He insisted on doing the cooking himself, claiming he needed something in his life that didn't involve giving orders. She would sit on the kitchen counter, watching him prepare dishes he learned at his grandmother's table. Fresh basil torn by hand, tomatoes simmered until sweet, pasta rolled thin. He looked different like this. Sleeves pushed up, forearms dusted with flour, expressions softened by tasks that required patience instead of power. But there were other places too. In Houston, he kept a glass-walled penthouse in River Oaks with a view of the skyline that glittered like a promise. When he brought her there the first time, she walked from room to room in disbelief. The air smelled faintly of cedar and citrus. A grand piano stood in a corner, untouched but polished to perfection. She asked whether he played. He replied that his mother tried to teach him but gave up after he kept breaking the keys out of frustration. It was the closest thing to childhood vulnerability he had ever shared. The second place was a beachfront property in Destin. The sand there was pale and soft, and the water carried a peaceful hush that soothed her more than she expected. Dominic rarely spoke during those trips. Instead, They spent long stretches sitting on the balcony while he worked through documents on his tablet and she read whichever book she grabbed before leaving home. Nights were slow, warm, and quiet, lit by ocean moonlight and the steady sound of waves. The fourth location was a cabin outside Asheville. This place surprised her the most. It was built from dark wood, with a fireplace large enough to warm the entire living room. Dominic liked it because it was isolated. No neighbors. No noise. No responsibilities knocking at his door. During those trips, he read poetry aloud while she soaked in the oversized tub, steam curling around them. His voice took on a tone she never heard anywhere else. Gentle, slower, more reflective, as if he allowed himself to feel something only within those four walls. He brushed her hair every night they stayed there. It became a ritual she never questioned, sitting on the rug, silk robe slipping off one shoulder while he sat behind her, carefully pulling the brush through her curls. Sometimes he tied it for her. Sometimes he didn't. But every stroke felt calmer than the life he lived outside. These private moments created a version of Dominic few people would ever believe existed. Yet the same man who cooked for her and read to her carried a sharpness that never fully disappeared. She saw it clearly the night he snapped at a security guard in Houston. They were leaving the penthouse elevator when the guard reached out to scan Dominic's temporary badge. His hand closed around Zora's arm by mistake, just a fraction too tight. Dominic moved before she could react. His voice stayed level, but his stare was cold enough to freeze the air. "Let go." The guard obeyed immediately, hands lifting in apology. Dominic positioned himself between them without raising his volume. No shouting. No threats. Just a quiet command that spoke louder than anything physical. Later in the car, he asked if her arm hurt. She said it didn't, even though it did. He touched the spot lightly, jaw tense, as if blaming himself for not catching it sooner. That was the kind of protection he offered, quiet, fierce, and absolute. But there were moments that reminded her he could not belong to her outside their secluded world. The night in the French Quarter proved that more than anything. She went out to celebrate her friend Brielle's birthday. They chose a casual spot known for live music, good food, and a crowd that minded its own business. Zora laughed easily that night, drinking a little, letting herself feel normal for the first time in weeks. She was in the middle of telling a story when the room shifted in a way she couldn't ignore. Conversations dipped. Heads turned. A group of sharply dressed men walked in, parting the crowd without touching anyone. She didn't need to see who led them, she felt it in her bones. Dominic. He wore a dark suit that fit his shoulders perfectly, his steps measured, every movement controlled. He never frequented lively places like this unless he had a reason. Two men flanked him. Another followed. His presence created distance even without trying. Their eyes connected for barely a second. Not a greeting. Not even an acknowledgement. Just a flicker of recognition before he looked past her like she was any other woman in the room. Her friends didn't notice, absorbed in their celebration. But Zora's chest tightened with an ache she couldn't smother. She understood his rules. She accepted the boundaries. Still, the emptiness crept in too easily. That night, around 2 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A driver waited outside her building. At the townhouse, Dominic sat on the couch with a bottle of champagne already open. He didn't smile. Instead, he handed her a glass. "I shouldn't have gone there," he said softly. "You had business," she replied, though the words scratched at her throat. He looked down at her hands. "I didn't like the way you looked at me after." She didn't respond, unsure how to explain a feeling she wasn't supposed to have. He rested a hand on her thigh. "I ask you to stay invisible only when I need to be visible. It's not you. It's the world I move in. It pays to pretend." She considered this, aware that the explanation didn't erase the sting. "Will it ever be enough?" she asked quietly. His answer came too fast. "I'll find a way to make it enough." A lie spoken with conviction. He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, as if trying to erase the earlier distance. Yet something lingered, a quiet shift they both felt but neither addressed. Their paradise remained intact, but a thin crack had surfaced. A reminder that their sanctuary had limits, and the outside world, no matter how hard they tried to keep it away, was beginning to press in. The charity gala returned to her mind in fragments, flashes of light, echoes of laughter, the quiet thud of her heartbeat against her ribs. But now, with everything leading up to it laid bare, the moment felt heavier, sharper, impossible to ignore. Zora had no business being at an event like this. She knew that the second she stepped into the ballroom. Still, she had agreed when Danielle waved 2 tickets with the giddiness of someone who'd stumbled into luck. Danielle's co-worker won them in a raffle and had no interest in dressing up for wealthy donors, so she passed them along. Zora didn't ask questions. She simply accepted, needing something to look forward to, something unrelated to velvet curtains and Dominic's hands on her skin. They spent the afternoon getting ready in Danielle's tiny bathroom. Zora borrowed a black dress from a friend, simple, fitted, threaded with subtle shimmer when the light hit it. Her curls were pinned back. Her earrings were fake, but no one would know unless they inspected them. She had hoped to blend in, nothing more. Be one face among hundreds. But the second she walked through the doors of the Warehouse District venue, her pulse quickened. The space was larger than she expected, filled with people who carried themselves like they were born for rooms like this. Servers moved between clusters of guests with trays of champagne, while musicians played softly near the stage. Danielle, oblivious to Zora's nerves, looped her arm through hers and pulled her deeper into the crowd. For the first 20 minutes, Zora managed. She smiled politely, sipped the champagne she couldn't pronounce, and tried to ignore the tension that always seeped in when she felt out of place. She was turning toward the silent auction table when Danielle muttered, "Damn. Who is that?" Zora didn't need to look. Her stomach tightened with instant recognition. But she turned anyway. Dominic stood at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by donors and men who clearly worked for him. His suit was tailored to perfection, giving him an air that drew attention without effort. His expression was neutral, his posture relaxed, his focus sharp. The kind of presence that made people step aside without realizing they'd done so. But it was the blonde woman on his arm that made Zora's breath stall. She was striking, tall, elegant, wearing diamonds that sparkled under the chandelier light. Her hand rested on Dominic's forearm with the ease of someone accustomed to having access to power. Zora's heart tightened painfully. She didn't want to stare, but her eyes couldn't move. She felt a rush of heat climb her neck, humiliation rising before anything else. Danielle leaned closer. "You okay? You look like you've seen." "I'm fine," Zora said quickly, trying to steady her voice. "Let's go look at the—" But she didn't finish, because one of Dominic's men, Tony, noticed her. His gaze flicked between her and Dominic, and he leaned in to whisper something. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the shift ripple through the group. Dominic's eyes swept across the room, steady and deliberate, landing on her without hesitation. For a split second, the world narrowed to that line of sight. No warmth. No hint of the man who brushed her hair at night or recited poems while she soaked in his bath. His stare was cool, detached, a wall slamming down between them. He said something to the group around him. Short, quiet. Whatever it was, it made 2 men chuckle. Even the blonde woman smiled faintly before casting a dismissive glance in Zora's direction, as if assessing a stranger who'd wandered too close to the wrong table. Zora felt her cheeks burn. Not with shame. With something deeper, something that scraped at the hollow places Dominic kept hidden. She lifted her chin. "Danny," she said softly, "I'm heading out." "You sure? Yeah. I shouldn't have come." She walked toward the exit with her head held high, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Each step felt heavier, the music fading behind her as she moved down the long hallway, past portraits of donors, past clusters of guests who didn't know her name. Her breath shook only when she reached the night air outside. Her heart wasn't just hurting, it was splintering. At home, She changed out of the borrowed dress and folded it neatly into the bag to return. She washed her face. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the dark window, trying to find a version of herself that didn't ache. An hour passed before the quiet hum of an engine drifted up from the street below. Zora walked to the window. A black Escalade idled at the curb, Dominic's driver. The headlights glowed against the pavement, unwavering, as if waiting for a sign she was willing to give. She didn't move. The SUV stayed for 10 minutes. 20. 30. A full hour of silence and expectation. She didn't turn on the lamp. Didn't lift the curtain fully. Didn't give him anything. Her phone vibrated repeatedly on the nightstand. Messages, missed calls, maybe even apologies, but she didn't read a single one. She reached for the device only once, to hold down the button and shut it off completely. The red light from the Escalade's taillights washed across her walls as it finally pulled away. She watched until it turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Only then did she lie down, curling onto her side, pressing her hands to her chest as the hollow space inside her widened until it consumed everything else. The darkness didn't comfort her. It simply filled in the places he used to touch. Dominic tried to convince himself that nothing had changed. He told his mind one story while his body lived another. The morning after the gala, he walked into his office with the same straight-backed confidence he always carried. Meetings were scheduled, calls were lined up, and men waited for orders. He didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't allow a single outward sign that anything had slipped out of place. If anyone noticed the tightening of his jaw or the tension in his shoulders, they knew better than to comment. For the first week, he repeated the same thought with stubborn certainty. Her leaving is for the best. He convinced himself she was safer away from him. He insisted she would move on quickly. He told himself she would be grateful, eventually, that he didn't drag her deeper into a world she didn't deserve. But every time his phone lit up with her name before he deleted the messages, something in his chest squeezed. He ignored it. He had ignored worse. A few days later, while handling business at the Velvet Room, the owner, who owed him more money than he'd ever admit, pulled him aside. Nervous. Sweating. "She's gone," he said quietly. Quit without notice. Cleaned out her locker and left her key on the desk. Dominic didn't respond at first. Not with words. The silence was sharp enough to make the owner's voice falter. He gave a short nod, dismissed him, and walked back out to his car without finishing the meeting. Tony followed behind, keeping distance, sensing the shift. Inside the SUV, Dominic leaned back and closed his eyes. The ache in his chest returned, tight, pressing, unwelcome. Indigestion, he muttered to himself. Nothing more. But the lie didn't land. Over the next 2 weeks, he hurled himself into business with a force that startled even the men closest to him. A territory dispute in Baton Rouge had dragged on for months. He settled it in one night with a warning no one chose to test. A supplier in Houston who had been skimming from shipments found himself shoved against a loading dock wall, Dominic's voice low and cold at his ear. A politician in Atlanta who kept forgetting his promises remembered them quickly after a brief meeting in a locked conference room. By the 3rd week, Tony had started watching him more carefully. Dominic wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating much. He pushed harder, spoke less, and solved every problem with a level of violence he usually kept in reserve. At night, he returned to the New Orleans townhouse, the place that had once been a quiet sanctuary. Now it felt like a reminder. Her perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway. Her robe remained folded at the foot of the bed. A hairpin sat on the bathroom counter where she'd left it during one of their weekends together. He didn't touch any of it. He just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, staring at the empty space where she used to sit with her knees pulled to her chest, asking gentle questions he pretended not to like answering. The truth grew harder to ignore with every passing day. She hadn't left because she couldn't handle him. She left because he asked her to shrink, to disappear, to accept pieces when she was worth far more. He had treated her like something he could pick up or put down depending on his needs. A possession. A secret. A luxury he kept out of sight. When the admission finally slid into focus, it settled in him like a weight he couldn't shake off. One night, while standing on the upper balcony overlooking the city, Tony approached quietly. Dominic didn't look at him. He just exhaled a breath that felt heavier than the air around them. "You want to talk about it?" Tony asked, stepping beside him. "No." But he didn't walk away. Tony rested his forearms on the railing, watching the traffic far below. She didn't want money. She didn't want the cars or the trips. She wanted you. Just you. Dominic's jaw tightened. "I gave her what I could." "You gave her what you were used to giving," Tony corrected. "Not what she needed." Dominic didn't respond. He couldn't. Every word landed too hard. After a stretch of silence, Tony tried again. "Boss, do you want her found?" Dominic's answer came out low, strained, almost broken. "Find her," he said. "But don't bring her back. Don't force anything. Just tell me she's safe." Tony nodded once, understanding the depth behind the request. Dominic stayed on the balcony long after Tony left, staring out at the city as if it held any answers. The wind pushed against his shirt, the lights flickered below, and for the first time in his life, he felt the smallest crack in the armor he had spent years building. If she was safe, he could breathe. If she was gone forever, he'd take that punishment quietly. He deserved worse. The only thing he couldn't stand was not knowing. The first month away from Dominic felt like stepping out of a burning building only to realize the smoke had followed her. Zora didn't collapse, didn't beg the universe for clarity. She simply moved. Movement was the only thing that didn't hurt. She transferred to the University of New Orleans with the last of her savings and a financial aid packet she filled out at her kitchen table while her hands shook. The campus felt foreign, loud, alive in a way she wasn't yet ready to be. Still, she forced herself into classes, scribbling notes she barely remembered later. It wasn't academic ambition that carried her through those weeks, it was the determination to rebuild without him. Her second month was consumed by work. She picked up shifts at a small restaurant in the Marigny, a narrow place with mismatched chairs and a stubborn AC unit. Tourists drifted in after wandering through jazz clubs. Locals claimed the corner tables and stayed for hours. Zora cleaned, carried plates, joked with the cooks, and let exhaustion drown the memories that tried to claw their way back. Her apartment on Frenchman Street was barely large enough for a bed, a dresser, and a hot plate that only functioned on its own schedule. Music drifted up from the street every night. Horns, laughter, the crackling pulse of a city that refused to sleep. Some nights she let the sounds comfort her. Other nights she pressed a pillow over her ears, trying to force her mind to be quiet. But her dreams betrayed her long before the sun rose. His hands. His voice. His warmth. They slipped past her defenses and dragged her back to a world she'd vowed to escape. Morning gave her the illusion of strength. She pretended she had never known him, never tasted the danger or the softness he hid from everyone but her. It worked, until it didn't. By the third month, Zora had learned the rhythm of her new life. Morning classes, afternoon study sessions, evening shifts, late-night walks home under the glow of bar signs and street lamps. She didn't feel whole, just functional. Sometimes that was enough. Other nights, the past didn't knock, it barged straight in. Like the night she came home after a double shift, her feet aching, her apron still dusted with flour. She turned onto Frenchman Street, expecting the usual, crowds, music, a drunk couple arguing over nothing. What she found instead stopped her cold. A black Escalade sat at the curb in front of her building. Sleek. Familiar. Out of place in a street full of bikes, beat-up sedans, and service vans. For a moment she convinced herself it wasn't his. New Orleans had 1,000 SUVs that looked just like it. It could be anyone. Then she saw him. Dominic leaned against the hood, arms folded, head tilted slightly down. His clothes were the same style he always wore, dark, fitted, expensive, but the man inside them had changed. His shoulders looked heavier. His eyes were fixed on the pavement, not surveying the area like he usually did. The confidence he wore like a second skin had been replaced by something rougher, stripped down. He looked tired. Older. Too human for the man she used to know. When he heard her footsteps, he lifted his head. For a second, neither of them moved. The street noise faded into background clutter, and all Zora could feel was her pulse pounding against her throat. She should have turned around. Walked away. Called someone. But she didn't. Because even after everything, her body still remembered him. And he looked like a man who had run out of ways to pretend he didn't need her. He pushed off the hood when she reached the curb, every movement measured as if one wrong step might send her running. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. Nothing like the smooth, commanding tone he used with everyone else. Zora, I can't breathe without you. She stood frozen, hands curled around the strap of her bag. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was anger, so sharp it tasted metallic. You didn't seem short of breath at the gala, she said quietly. You looked just fine with your arm around that woman. Dominic flinched. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening at the corner of his eyes. But for a man who rarely reacted to anything, it felt like the ground shifting. She wasn't. Don't, she cut in. I know what I saw. I know how you laughed. I know how she looked at me like I was nothing. Because that's what you let me be. Dominic exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself for impact. I was wrong. All of it. Every choice I made where you were concerned. Humiliation doesn't just wash off, she said. You kept me hidden. You made me feel like some secret you could stash away whenever it got inconvenient. His gaze didn't waver. I won't deny any of that. I won't defend it. I thought keeping you separate from my world would protect you. I told myself distance was safety. But 3 months without you showed me exactly what I'd thrown away. Her throat tightened, but she held firm. What did you think you lost? A distraction? A habit? No, his voice cracked. I lost you. Silence settled between them, heavy, uncertain, real. For the first time since she left, Zora felt the ground beneath her shift, not from pain, but possibility. Zora didn't invite him inside. She stood beneath the street lamp at the corner of Frenchman, tired from work, heart pounding from the storm he carried with him. Dominic kept his distance, hands open at his sides, as if approaching too quickly would shatter whatever thin bridge still existed between them. Give me one chance, he said. One real chance to do this the way I should have from the beginning. She folded her arms, not from defensiveness but from the need to anchor herself. A chance to do what? Whisper apologies in private again. Pretend I don't exist when eyes are on you. No, he answered immediately. To stand beside you. Not behind you. Not in some hidden place where no one can see what you mean to me. He lifted his chin, meeting her gaze without flinching. I want the world to know exactly who you are to me. Her pulse stuttered, hope and fear wrestling for space. Your world isn't built for this. You move through danger like it's air. You think bringing me into the open won't put me in the line of fire. He stepped closer, stopping when she inhaled sharply. If anyone threatened you, I'd turn everything I own, everything I've built, into dust. I'd burn every part of my life before I let harm touch you. The rawness in his voice made her chest tighten, but she didn't let it sway her. I won't be hidden again. Not in whispers. Not in shadows. Not as something you stash away because it's easier. You won't be, he said. If I ever hurt you again, if I ever make you feel small, neither of us would recover from it. Her throat thickened. This doesn't erase what happened. I know, he replied softly. But I'll earn your trust every day. For as long as I breathe. Zora felt something inside her shift. Not forgiveness, but the first hint of clarity. The saxophone from a nearby club floated across the street, notes curling around the cool night air. Zora's hands relaxed, though her eyes stayed sharp, studying him. Dominic shifted his weight but did not break the silence. Finally, he spoke, quieter this time. I've spent months thinking I could control everything, including you. I was wrong. I treated you as if protection meant possession. I confused ownership with care. That ends tonight. Her chest tightened. She had felt that weight, the illusion of safety that felt like a cage. She wanted freedom more than reassurance, more than his promises. You don't get to rewrite the past, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. You can't erase being invisible in public, being a secret in your world. I know, he admitted, a faint trace of vulnerability breaking through the armor he always wore. I hid you because I didn't want anyone to judge you, to question why you were mine. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I was diminishing you. That was my failure, not yours. Zora exhaled slowly, letting some of the tension seep out. Some loves can survive darkness, Dominic. But the question is whether they can survive the light. I need more than secrecy. I need truth. He nodded, understanding more than she said. Then we step into it together. No hiding, no excuses, no apologies whispered in rooms where no one else is allowed. From now on, the world sees us both, your worth, your presence, everything you are. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine walking beside him without compromise, without shadows. The streets of New Orleans hummed around them, a city of secrets holding one less tonight. Dominic stepped closer, cautiously, as if waiting for permission. When she didn't move away, he reached for her hand, not claiming it but offering it. The difference struck her immediately. He wasn't pulling. He wasn't directing. He was asking. I can't undo the hurt, he said. But I can spend every day earning the chance to be the man you needed from the start. His voice held none of the polished charm he used in boardrooms or backrooms. This was raw, stripped down, the truth as plain as his heartbeat visible beneath his shirt. Zora swallowed hard. If you hurt me again, Dominic. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. He nodded, jaw tight. If I betray you again, neither of us would come back from it. I know that. I won't make promises I don't intend to keep. All I can give you is effort, consistent, honest effort. She searched his face for any sign of the man who once kept her in the margins of his life. Instead, she found someone standing in front of her with his defenses lowered, choosing vulnerability over dominance. This doesn't fix anything, she said softly. It's not meant to, he replied. It's the first brick in something new. The weight she had carried for months loosened. Shame, his and hers, had shaped too many decisions. It had whispered lies about worth and belonging. Tonight, they allowed truth to speak louder. Shame isolates. Love reveals. Zora stepped forward, pressing her forehead to his. The connection was gentle, steady, earned. Around them, Frenchman Street glowed with neon lights and music drifting through open doors. Life moving on, indifferent and constant. Okay, she whispered. We try again. But this time, we do it in the open. His breath caught, relief sharp and visible. Together, he murmured. Their arms wrapped around each other, grounding them as a saxophone played something slow and soulful nearby. Two people choosing light over secrecy, dignity over silence, truth over convenience. New Orleans had held countless stories of broken hearts and second chances. Tonight, it held theirs, quiet, imperfect, real. If this story moved you, hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who needs this message today. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.